Welcome to Class 2 on the Book of Revelation. I am your teacher, Dennis Regling. Let's get started right away since we have a tremendous amount of information to cover in this video, and I'll warn you that it will move quickly. I recommend 5 books and a few other resources you might consider purchasing. The first is The Avenging of the Apostles and Prophets. In my view, Ogden's commentary is the best, and it isn't very long or expensive. For a copy, contact Ogden Biblical Resources at aogden.com. Second on the list is The Wars of the Jews. Other than the Bible, I consider this the most important book every Christian should read. There's a recent translation by Galia Kornfeld, Josephus the Jewish War, Kornfeld spelled Cornfeld. It's a coffee table size book with National Geographic quality pages, color and black and white photographs, and extensive commentary on the first century Jewish Pharisee who witnessed the temple fall and the siege of Jerusalem, having previously been a Jewish general fighting the Romans. Kornfeld's translation adds a lot of commentary and photographs. The best version is usually about $40 used on Amazon. Don't pay the $300 listings. The next book is Before Jerusalem Fell, Dating the Book of Revelation by Kenneth L. Gentry. This is a thorough review of all the evidence regarding when John wrote Revelation. I've said often, anyone who forms an opinion about the dating of Revelation without reading this book has an uninformed opinion. This may not be the greatest book ever written, but it's the single best source for evaluating both sides of the dating argument. It's also available as a DVD, which is shorter and visual if that's your preference. Even better is The Beast of Revelation by Kenneth Gentry. This book covers 2 topics under one cover. Roughly half the book focuses on Revelation 13 and the 666 issue, and the other half condenses the arguments from Before Jerusalem Fell about the date. If you're only going to buy one book on my list, start with Ogden's and then get this one. Another book I recommend is Gary DeMar's Last Days Madness, which covers the modern religious obsession with end times prophecy. It gives a broad overview, especially relevant in America since the 1800s, and is highly recommended. Our topic tonight is the dating and authorship of Revelation, which is, by my estimation, the single most misunderstood and derailing topic for interpreting Revelation. There are lots of views on Revelation, but before most people start to study, they come to a fork in the road. Depending on which direction you take, you'll see the book in radically different ways. It can become unrecognizable depending on your starting assumptions. Tonight I want to dip into this subject. Get Before Jerusalem Fell. It's a long read, or Kenneth Gentry's alternative, The Beast of Revelation. Think carefully about when the book was written. The majority of people, at least in the last century or so, have made the serious mistake of deciding before studying that Revelation was written under Emperor Domitian in the 90s AD. Therefore, they reason that the phrase, the things which are shortly to come to pass, cannot possibly refer to the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD, an event that would already be 25 years in the past. Most people who accept the late date automatically exclude a first century fulfillment from their thinking. For them, it wasn't even conceivable. As a result, they set aside the true meaning of the book and went in search of another way to interpret it. Even if you believe the book was written late, you still must account for statements that the time was near and Jesus is coming quickly. We talked about this at length last week. If you accept a late date, your new challenge is to find an interpretation set in the early 2nd century, but nearly no one actually argues for that. Once they drop Jerusalem as the focus of most of the book, they end up chasing a kind of mythical beast of interpretation, and that's why we have so many varying opinions about what Revelation really means. You can already tell that I'm going to argue vigorously for an early date. Most Bible students believe Revelation was written between 91 and 98 AD, at least 21 years after Rome destroyed Jerusalem. Of course, that would mean the things that must shortly come to pass, Revelation 1:1, couldn't possibly refer to the past. So, they never even considered Jerusalem's fall in 70 AD as a possible fulfillment. Many reject the idea that the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD could be the subject of the book of Revelation, but are they right to dismiss the single most cataclysmic event in Jewish history, an event repeatedly foretold in the Old Testament and New Testament, and often discussed by Jesus himself? Are they correct to insist on a late date for Revelation's authorship? A significant number of respected Bible students believe that Revelation was actually written between 64 and 68 AD, just 2 to 6 years before Jerusalem fell. That's the premise behind Kenneth Gentry's book, Before Jerusalem Fell. I don't know Kenneth Gentry personally, but I recommend his work highly. It is truly excellent. If the book was written before the fall, then the catastrophic events described in Revelation fit the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD extremely well, and all took place shortly after the book was penned. Let's consider Homer Haley's book, Revelation, an Introduction and Commentary. On pages 26 and 27 of his Revelation commentary, Haley writes, "Scholars have debated the date of John's receiving and writing Revelation, usually choosing between the reign of Nero, AD 64 to 68, and Domitian, AD 91 to 96. He adds, "A formidable array of illustrious names defend the Neronian date, while an equally reputable host supports the Domitian date, but this array of names does not resolve the question. Both camps include impressive and respected scholars, so which position is correct? Many talented scholars accept and defend the early date. Among them are F. Bruce, Adam Clark, Alfred Edersheim, J.W. Farrar, Philip Schaff, J.B. Lightfoot, Edward Young, F.E. Wallace, and many others, including Westcott and Hort. Should their testimony be discounted simply because it's not the majority opinion? Of course not. Being outside the mainstream does not make one wrong." To illustrate, here's an 1881 copy of the Greek New Testament by Westcott and Hort, whose introduction is by Philip Schaff, widely considered among the greatest church historians. These men endorsed the early date for Revelation. So the division really is about evenly split. Scholars both old and new take positions on both sides. According to Haley, internal evidence points to the reign of Nero or soon after his death, about AD 68. Let's talk briefly about this dating question. There are really only two viable respected choices, before 70 AD or after 70 AD, about 30 years apart. Several passages in Revelation, such as 2:10, 6:9-11, and 13:7, among others, specifically describe the persecution of the saints. The external evidence assumes this refers to Roman persecution under Domitian, but often neglects or undervalues the earlier persecution by Nero. Here's the reality. Jewish persecution of Christians began at the very start. The Jews persecuted Jesus to death, then continued persecuting his followers. That was an empire-wide persecution as Jews who became Christians found themselves in trouble throughout the Roman world. But it is an established historical fact that Nero was the first Roman emperor to persecute Christians. That is undeniable. Now let's look at Revelation 13:3-4. "The whole earth marveled and followed the beast. They worshiped the dragon because he gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, 'Who is like the beast, and who can wage war against him?'" This passage famously describes emperor worship. Many argue that this only began with Domitian, but in reality, emperor worship existed long before. Smyrna, one of the 7 churches addressed in Revelation, had a temple dedicated to Dea Roma, the goddess of Rome, in 195 BC, some 250 years before Jerusalem fell. During Nero's lifetime, he regularly claimed divinity and would kill those who refused to acknowledge it. Some claim the churches of Revelation hadn't existed long enough to warrant the descriptions given to them, but that simply isn't true. For instance, Galatia had apostles and inspired writers from the start, but quickly fell away and needed correction. Why couldn't the Asian churches also decline rapidly? All the arguments based on external evidence have reasonable and convincing answers, as discussed in Before Jerusalem Fell. To me, these answers strongly favor an early date for Revelation. Returning to Revelation 13:18, "Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. This verse may be the most famous in the book, if not the whole Bible. In the first century, if one had wisdom and understanding, one could calculate the man's number, 666, and know who he was. Early Christians knew what it meant. The earliest external commentator, Irenaeus circa 130 to 202 AD, wrote about the meaning of 666. He said, if it were necessary for the name to be revealed at that time, it would have been announced by the one who saw the apocalypse, for it was not long ago that it, the book or the man, was seen almost in Irenaeus' own generation toward the end of Domitian's reign. This quote, though often used to support the late date, is ambiguous. In Greek, "it was seen" could refer either to the book's writing or to John himself. Some scholars believe Irenaeus was saying that John had been seen recently, not that the Apocalypse was written recently. Others think he meant the book itself was recent. I am convinced that Irenaeus meant that John would have revealed the man's name, the Antichrist, if he had intended to, because he, John, had been present during Domitian's reign, meaning that John lived until that time, not necessarily that the book was written then. That allows for an earlier date for the book, with John himself living into Domitian's period. Furthermore, in another section of his writing, Irenaeus says that the number 666 is found in all the approved and ancient copies. If Domitian's reign was nearly in Irenaeus' own time, but he refers to the copies as ancient, this supports the view that the book itself was older. Several early church fathers in the 3rd and 4th centuries likewise connect John's exile on Patmos with Domitian's reign. Yet some weren't clear whether the tyrant was Nero or Domitian. The term tyrant was commonly used to refer to Nero, as seen in many historical sources. Tacitus, Suetonius, Pliny the Elder, Juvenal, and others, all of whom predate Eusebius, who quoted Irenaeus. All of this evidence means that internal and external evidence must be weighed carefully. When Revelation 13:18 says, "Here is wisdom, let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast," it refers to someone readers could actually identify in the 1st century. The name Nero Caesar, in its common spelling, using Hebrew numerical values, equals 666. Interestingly, some ancient manuscripts read 616 instead. Nero's name without the final N, Neron, adds up to 616, suggesting copyists knew exactly whom this pointed to. Now let's examine more internal evidence. Revelation 17:9-11 says, "Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, one is, the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. And the beast that was and is not is himself also an 8th, and is of the 7, and goes to destruction." To 1st century readers, 5 have fallen, one is, the other has not yet come, would be clear. These referred to Roman emperors. Josephus, the 1st century Jewish historian, counted Julius Caesar as the first Roman emperor, then Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Gaius, and Claudius. Nero was 6th. This fits perfectly with the internal chronology of Revelation and the understanding of 1st century Jews. In Revelation 11:1-2, John is told to measure the temple and those who worship there, but to leave out the outer court, for it is given to the Gentiles, who will trample the holy city for 42 months. This is the exact length of the Roman siege of Jerusalem from 66 AD to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, 42 months. This number is not symbolic for something else, it's actual history. Now, compare that with Jesus' prophecy in Luke 21:20-24. "When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled." Do you think that might just be the 42 months in Revelation? Is it possible? Is it something we must reject because of the late date theory? No, not if we consider the internal biblical evidence. Revelation 11:8 says, "Their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified." What city is that? Clearly, it is Jerusalem. All this internal evidence leads me to believe that ignoring the fall of Jerusalem and chasing after theories that stretch over the centuries may be one of the biggest interpretive errors a student could make. Let's not dismiss early dating and the destruction of Jerusalem as the context of Revelation. Let's read the book carefully and allow its clues to speak for themselves. Finally, the most compelling external evidence: the oldest known manuscript of Revelation, a Syriac copy dating from the 600s AD, features a title added by the copyist stating, "The revelation which was made by God to John the Evangelist in the island of Patmos, into which he was thrown by Nero Caesar," not Domitian, Nero. This is the oldest manuscript of Revelation in existence, and it credits Nero, not Domitian, with John's exile and the writing of the book. Let's consider what such evidence suggests, and be willing to keep every possibility on the table as we continue our study. Be sure to subscribe so you won't miss the next video.